Hi everyone, we're here again with Dr. Clif Lewis for one more episode where we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and organizational culture and the new world that arises ahead of us. Okay, hi Cliff, very nice
Hi,
to speak with you again.
hi, Stelios. Always good to chat to you.
Likewise. So I know today you're at the conference. Want to say a few words about that conference?
Yes, sure. So, anyone who maybe follows my work might know that one of my areas of expertise is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this conference is one of the conferences that I usually attend. Sometimes I present my research as well. So this one is called Gender Work and Organization. So it is a conference, and there's also a academic journal attached to the organization. So they have annual conferences, and they also publish academic research on gender and employment, but also broader diversity and inclusion issues. This year, I'm convening a stream on post-COVID DEI regression, and with a focus on gender, of course, because we are seeing in a post-COVID organizations, there's been a lot of strides in breaking the glass ceiling, closing the gender wage gap, all of these things. And we're seeing during COVID recovery, COVID recovery, we're seeing a kind of a backsliding where women started taking over more of the domestic responsibilities. These are obviously within heteronormative relationships, which I know isn't representative of all relationships, but in those, women are more likely to sacrifice their career. The gender gap is the gender wage gap is rearing its ugly head again. So in my stream, we're hearing a lot of really interesting papers being presented on new research. Just today, an academic from Australia presented a really interesting piece of work on fully remote organizations and the organizational culture around that. And the wording that she used was so interesting. The organization sits in a cloud. So the organization exists in a cloud, and any kind of physical space that they have, they don't refer to them as offices or headquarters. They refer to them as collaboration centers, which is a complete shift in thinking. Your organization exists in a cloud virtually, and anything that's real is very intentional and purpose driven, which I think was fascinating. And then, of course, a bunch of other really, really cool pieces of work. So that's where I am currently.
Okay, that's interesting. And so I wanted to ask you, you raised a couple of interesting points, and maybe I need to take notes so I don't forget them.
Sure.
With regards to gender roles and, maybe one partner sacrificing the career, do you think that AI can actually help with that? Because AI is a productivity tool, right? So it could be the case that maybe someone can keep their their current levels of productivity, while maybe spending more time with their family. What are your thoughts on that?
So so I'm a people professional, so I can't really comment on what AI can do. But what I can tell you is my opinions based on my rudimentary understanding of AI, right? So the other day, I saw a really interesting post by an AI, wish I can remember his name, on LinkedIn. An AI professional posted something about everyone's talking about AI and how AI is this and that. But essentially, all AI is something that is able to recognize patterns, analyze patterns, and predict future patterns. And so I think if we use it and view it in that way and use that as a lens to look at what's happening in the new world of work, because I focus exclusively where I can on the new world of work and new things that are happening and how we can structure and organize work in a better way. I think AI can assist us in, if I think of the stream at the conference that I'm convening, help us identify patterns of backsliding into exclusionary practices, discriminatory practices that we might think, well, let's just recover from COVID. We took a massive hit, so we can't really worry about diversity or anything like that now. We just need to make the money. I think AI can help us um, identify opportunities to not backslide in old ways of working and
Mm.
embrace new ways of working. Yeah, and to maintain the progress and the momentum of the progress that we've made.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think in certain ways, like going back to that remote-only organization you mentioned, I guess
Mm,
AI, these types of organizations are probably going to find it easier to integrate any kind of AI, whether it's scenario or general AI, simply because everything is online. So my guess is that maybe these organizations are going to get ahead of the curve in that way, and it will be quite
mm,
interesting to see whether some remote-first organizations end up being more competitive against traditional
mm.
organizations that require, you know, like 4 days or 5 days, whatever, a week going
Yeah.
to the office. On the other hand, I guess, you know, if we're talking about things like the automated detection of, you know, certain biases or certain patterns of
Mm,
work, then
mm,
I think maybe that's not so much the case for AI. Like in theory, I can imagine how this would take place, but it might be more of a problem for analytics, not so much for advanced AI or machine learning, simply because the latter, they usually require large amounts of data. And what company would actually give this kind of data? What company would actually label that data, right? But if an organization is working primarily in a remote fashion, then it would be easier
mm.
for someone to just dig through the data and do more like traditional analytics, which I guess is not as impressive as AI. That's not to
Yeah.
say it actually in the very near future, and this is what I think some of the big companies are doing, like of the big tech, like OpenAI, for example. They're trying to create
Mm,
AI data scientist, as in like an AI that can actually automatically analyze data, which is
mm,
another, you know, interesting pattern. So in that case, going back to detecting certain patterns of work online, the main methods employed would still be around traditional analytics, but maybe you have an AI data scientist doing that.
mm. Well, what I find interesting is when we talk about anything related to future of work, and whether it's the 4-day work week or fully remote or whatever new different way of organizing employment and work, there's, as humans are, we resist change. We like to stay in our comfort zone because it's safe and it's
Mm,
non-threatening. But the rationale that is used is always from a position of assuming that the old way of, or the current or the old way of doing things is without fault.
mm,
So, so if you take, say, something like remote work, and then people say, well, you know, if people are working remotely, I can't make sure that they're working. I can't be sure that they're at their computer. People are going to abuse the
mm,
benefit or whatever the case might be, implying that if someone is at the office, they're always working, they're always productive, and they're not like on their, you know what I mean? So there's
mhm.
these false assumptions about the old way of doing things, and I think if we if we think of AI again, not an AI professional, so my understanding is quite rudimentary, but if we use it as a lens of identifying patterns, analyzing patterns, and predicting future patterns in data, we can use that to kind of shine a light on these assumptions that we hold about the old way of working and to identify, listen, this old way of working that's giving us a lot of comfort, it's actually a false sense of comfort,
Mm.
especially if you take into consideration all the other changes that have happened. You might want to do something in the old way or in the classical way that like you've been doing it for decades, but because of the changes outside of your organization, doing it in that way doesn't make sense.
I think it does, right? The thing is that to that point, it was surprising to see that some of the big tech organizations, which in theory they would promote trends like the metaverse and AI, they return to some traditional patterns of work, like Apple
Mm,
being the main culprit, Amazon.
mm,
And I think that a lot of this conversation is anecdotal. Like, oh, we believe so and so. We believe employees are more productive when they do X, Y, Z. Well, if that's the case, then what do so many employees decide to quit? And it's surprising to me that you have these sophisticated organizations, but when it comes
mm,
to issues around organizational culture, they're actually not very data driven. And we're not even really talking about artificial intelligence now, right? So we're talking about more
mm,
traditional data science, and being able to analyze the data and produce evidence. But I think that to a large extent, when we're talking about anything has to do with psychology, social sciences in an applied setting, there seems to be quite often a resistance to using more sophisticated methods or techniques, or at the very least, even if you see this sometimes in academia, maybe it doesn't really take place at the organizational level. I don't know why that's the reason, right? It could be, I don't know, maybe tradition, again, the old ways of working, could be accessibility to different techniques. And it could be the case that actually AI, like an AI data analyst, could help with that, right? So maybe someone can say, hey, can you please help me from this data set, make a decision, give me a hypothesis test or whatever to figure out, to get a valid answers to whether, for example, this intervention in the company, this mode of working seems to be better or not. Or how do I design an experiment to figure out whether remote working versus hybrid versus 5 days in the office is actually better, which one's the better choice?
Look, the conversation around especially large tech organizations, like I think Facebook is probably the best example of how ridiculous the situation actually is they're selling the metaverse. They're selling the metaverse for people to have their businesses in the metaverse, but their own employees has to be at the physical office. I mean, that makes
makes no
sense.
sense. Yeah.
So, but the thing is, this is a very, very complex issue. You can have it at various levels. You can have it at the individual level. And so people at an individual level might want something or might be resistant to something. That could be an employee, that could be a CEO or a board member, that could have that impact. It could be the culture of the organization or the industry in which it operates, or you could have it at a more macro conversation where it becomes a bit more nefarious and you talk about, the politics of, who owns the office block and who wants to still make his money. So that's why people need to go back to the office. So you can have this conversation at various levels. And it's difficult to kind of decide which one, because all of them influence what we are observing. So it's not it's a very complex conversation to have, and it's difficult to kind of find a way in. So I try to balance it between working with other experts like yourself, and try to collaborate. And because one approach isn't so you mentioned, social sciences, psychology, that isn't the answer to every people problem. Some people problems might require data, like something that you can produce. Not that social sciences can produce data, but that's what I find. That's why I also really like doing interdisciplinary work, collaborating and having more eyes on the same issue, because we're dealing with new issues that are complex, that have so many levels. I don't know where I was going with that, but that's my opinion.
No, but I think one of the best points is the one you made about the metaverse and Facebook. If I'm selling, I don't know, tequila, but I'm against alcohol. It makes no sense. But I think that's why metaverse also seems to be, it's a very interesting concept, but I just don't see it taking off. And I think big tech now has shifted gears towards AI. But I guess there's a difference there. I think AI, in certain ways, it's very disruptive, and the reason it's very disruptive in the world of work is because it's actually not disruptive in our patterns of working. I'm not sure if what I'm saying makes sense. So it's like, you're a marketer, you're still gonna keep doing the same thing, but you're just gonna spend less time writing emails. You're gonna, I'm a data scientist, maybe you're gonna spend less time writing code or whatever, right? Whereas the metaverse and even like more innocuous, well, let's say, change, like more innocuous themes like remote working or hybrid working, they're actually threatening the old way of doing things. So at least from a Western perspective, because I'm talking from a Western perspective because this is the culture I'm exposed to, right? I think if you try to speak in terms of efficiency and productivity, it just becomes much easier to sell things. Where if you say, for example, you're just going to do this thing, but it's going to be cheaper, or, you're going to be more productive or whatever, it's easier. So AI is easy. But if you try to change the status quo without maybe an obvious monetary benefit, then society and organizations, they tend to fall back to the default, which is not obviously not always the best choice. It seems like the safe choice, but this is where disruption innovation can actually get a company ahead of the curve.
Yeah. I had a thought now that completely. I left my brain, the last functioning brain cell in the other. Oh, this is what I wanted to say. I think one of the reasons why we're seeing also so many so much controversy. The media organizations also like to create sensation. They know that the moment they publish a headline of a CEO saying remote work doesn't work or everyone has to go back to the office, they know people are going to freak out. So, but I think a lot of that is also said, even though it's maybe not said in a public space, is because we do have a crisis of leadership. I mean, we had a crisis of, that's, by the way, that's my other area of expertise, is leadership. I think leadership diversity. We had a crisis of leadership before the pandemic. And now that the pandemic has, turned the world upside down, that's even more pronounced. And there was something you said that made me think about this. I'm not entirely sure what it was, but the point that I wanted to make is one of the services that I offer, I don't want this to sound like I'm plugging my services, but one of the things that I do is coaching, executive coaching, leadership coaching. And so I posted, I wrote a little LinkedIn article, like I do from time to time, on coaching in the future of work. And the point that I made was, it's less about the new things. I think it was because you mentioned, you can use AI to analyze something. It's less about the new things, and it's more about the new thinking. And so I wish I can think of an example. I wish I had to open it up. I've got quite a few. I've got like a list of old type of thinking. So say, for instance, it's something like remote work, right? No, automation. This is a good example. So automation, business process automation, robotic business process automation, an old world thinking, because you mentioned productivity and profitability. So an old world way of thinking about automation is, how much money can I save by cutting jobs, cutting salaries, reducing the liability that having employees brings to my organization by having this automation software or process? That's an old way of thinking.
Yeah.
A new way of thinking that would address this crisis of leadership that we're seeing would be, how can I use automation to keep the people that I have, but to unburden them, to take repetitive, mindless tasks out of their hands, to free up their minds and their capacity to collaborate so that we can solve problems, so that we can innovate. And I think that is a big thing that needs to be addressed. And I don't think we'll be able to see the full potential that AI can offer organizations if we think about AI and technology in general in these old terms. We need to like completely shift our thinking, and that's just one example. I can't remember the other ones. I have a few examples in the piece. But that's definitely very important, because otherwise we're gonna keep seeing tech companies selling stuff that they don't actually use themselves. It's gonna be a pattern that keeps repeating. I can notice
like
that
the
pattern.
metaverse.
Does that mean I'm an AI? I just noticed that pattern.
No, but because I guess you're conscious, but then that's a different.
Right.
The conversation is AI conscious, but let's not get there now. We'll never finish. But yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned that the companies that are going to get ahead of the curve are the ones that will understand how to use AI to increase the productivity of their current employees. I think that's difficult because most managers, most leaders, they're not primed to think in this way. I mean, that's some of the work I've been doing, right? In terms of educating the public. I've written 3 books on AI. Now the 3rd book just came out last week on the history of AI. That's the work we
Oh,
do with
congrats.
Tesseract Academy. Yeah, thanks a lot. And by the way, if anyone's listening, just drop me an email. I can send you a copy. And that's the work we've been doing with Tesseract Academy, right? Like educate leaders and decision makers. But the thing is that most people just don't get it. That's something surprising. It's just so easy to fall back to these same patterns. And I think maybe one of the ways to cure this problem, I mean, it's clear that the leaders and managers, they need to educate themselves better. But I think we need frameworks. We need maybe courses. We need something which is going to help leaders navigate, like a blueprint, navigate this landscape before anything else. And probably, that's something that we should work on together. It's during those sessions, I think we get some
Yes,
ideas as well.
I'm wondering if maybe if anyone who's listening or watching this could comment and let us know if you're concerned about AI or how AI relates to group dynamics or organizational culture, or you're a leader and what I've mentioned about the crisis of leadership, and we're thinking about AI in old terms. If that's something that resonates with you, please let us know what types of courses or blueprints or help you need. Because obviously, we want to pay rent at the end of the month, but we also want to make sure that we put stuff out there that people need, and that can make a difference, and that can make just this new world order more bearable and easier to navigate.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think that's a very good point. And probably like I think we also reached the end of this podcast. We're a bit over time, but that's great because I think
I can keep going for the days.
but we're gonna run more episodes anyway, so
Yeah.
we can keep something for later. But yeah, thanks everyone for being here with us. And if you're interested in any of this, just feel free to email us or find us on LinkedIn. We're also like actively working on the space AI and organizational culture, so we do want to hear from you and understand what the community really needs. So let us know, and see you again soon.
Bye everyone. Thanks for having me, Stelios. Always great
Bye.
chatting to you.
Bye.